love me. Tell me pretty lies, look me in the face. Tell me that you love me, even if it's fake.
Om Shri Krishna Parabrahmane Namaha. Today I am going to discuss the topic Ishwara and Worship. After the prayer, let us start. Vyasam vasishtanaptaram shakte pautramakalmasham parajaratmajam vande shukatatam taponidhim. Ishvara pranidhana, loosely translated as devotion to God, is one of the foundations of the yoga practice. It is one of the 5 niyamas. This Ishwara Pranidhana practice was described in the Yoga Sutras over 2000 years ago. Ishwara Pranidhana practice and meditating can transform your consciousness. Ishwara Pranidhana as a practice. How? Yoga is a tree with 8 aspects. The first 2 of these branches are the yamas and niyamas, which are moral and ethical injunctions, and form the foundation of all other aspects of yoga. The yamas and niyamas are non-harming, truthfulness, non-stealing, sexual purity, non-receiving of gifts, inner and outer participation, contentment, mortification, spiritual study, and worship of God. This last niyama, worship of God, is Ishwara Pranidhana. Genuine worship is any practice that moves our awareness more deeply into the divine. The other aspects of the tree of yoga are physical exercises, breath control, consciously turning the senses within concentration, meditation, and samadhi. Through the practice of yoga, we can become conscious of our eternal nature. It is from our eternal aspect that we develop our sense of God. Eventually, in the yogic journey, we each need to feel the divine in a way that draws our longing to experience God. Once we have a sense of yoga, prayer, meditation, visualizations, mantra, and anything else that connects you with that from which your sense of self has emerged. To elevate into the practice of Ishwara Pranidhana is to make a significant stride in your yoga practice, because it involves conceptualizing and feeling God and igniting your heart and emotion into your practice. Finding your unique conception of God without form, masculine, feminine, young, old, etc. This is called your chosen ideal. Let us see some examples of Ishwara Pranidhana. I was raised a Roman Catholic. So my first conception of God was that of an old man who sat in judgment of human souls and either cast them to hell or lifted them to heaven. This conception created fear in me, but may have been very helpful for learning the feelings of right and wrong and the concept of punishment for eternity. Every journey has a destination, and the word God is often used as the destination of the spiritual journey. As much as many religious organizations and fundamentalists thinkers would like us to think otherwise. God can mean many different things to different people. This makes perfect sense as we each view that lives through the unique lens of our personal experiences and cultural upbringing. Hence, Lord Buddha, or a river, or a mandala, or anything else of our choosing can each be God. Is that not the true meaning of realizing freedom? Devotion to your own highest ideals will lift your yoga practice to new heights. Have the courage to conceive of God in a way that resonates with you and find ways to connect with that feeling in your own heart and life. Then you will soon find yourself soaring to new heights of realization. The nature of one's aspiration for the ultimate realization through yoga is perhaps the most important conditioning factor in the practice. This is clearly stressed by Patanjali Maharshi is one of his sutras. If the aspiration is lukewarm and not intense enough, there would be a corresponding dampening of the speed with which one progress towards the realization of the God. The greatest sadhana or practice is the longing of the soul for God. The pressure which one feels from within one's self in the direction of the supreme attainment. To cite an analogy, in the case of a river, the greater the force of the waters of the river, the quicker does the river reach its destination. Is it? But if the same river mellows and moves stagnantly and reluctantly, as it were, it will reach its end only if the aspiration is intense and burning inside. That should be known. That is called Tivra Samvegana Masannaha. Quick is the result of yoga. Immediate is the realization. If the samvega or the aspiration of the soul is very strong and burningly intense, the word used in the sutra is samvega, a term which has its own peculiar significance. The words we normally use, such as desire, longing, aspiration, a little bit to understand the significance of the meaning hidden in the word samvega. It is a shaking up of the whole personality of ours from top to bottom, by the very root, as it were, where our personality gets devastated by the urge of the spirit for ultimate perfection. Samvega is truly devastating. Devastating is the only word which brings out the meaning of the term samvega. When samvega arises in us for the great perfection, it breaks our personality to pieces, shatters us to shreds. It is difficult to translate this word samvega, but its implied meaning should by now be reasonably clear. It is not the little devotion that we try to show to God in our daily routines of practice. It is not the so called religiosity of approach. It is something unthinkable, an anguish of the spirit, a surge of the soul, raining of the entire personality out of its essence. We are never in this position at any time of our life. Such samvega never takes possession of us. We may be devoted people, but even then, our devotion is mostly half hearted, reluctant, and lukewarm. Such lukewarm devotion cannot bring in success, and certainly not quick success. Even in Samvega, Patanjali mentions 3 degrees: Mrudu, Madhya, and Adhimatra. Soft aspiration is called Mrudu. Middling a little more intense than it is called Madhya. But flaming like conflagration of fire and unquenchable in its intensity is the aspiration called Adhimatra. Vairagya, aversion, and Adhimatra Samvega. People in our present day world cannot imagine what this sort of Samvega could be. A person who does not feel the need for God cannot ask for Him. And a need is felt only when the world cracks under one's feet, and not before that. A time comes in everyone's life when such an experience is encountered. No one can escape this situation. Why, it may be today or it may be tomorrow, and until that eventuality occurs, our soul will not actually cry from its bottom for that which it actually longs for. Now, the concept of Ishvara, a pragmatized necessity. One of the suggestions given again by Patanjali in regard to this Samvega or deep aspiration is worship of God or Ishvara. The concept of Ishvara is peculiar to the system of Patanjali, while we are all quite familiar with this term, Ishvara, as denoting God. There is a peculiarity in the connotation of the word Ishvara as used in the system of Patanjali. While we are all familiar with the theological or religious concept of God, a purely pragmatic conception governs the idea behind Ishvara in the system of Patanjali. It is pragmatic because it is utilitarian and it is regarded as an essentiality for the purpose of concentration of the mind. So, the reason why the concept of Ishvara is introduced in the system of yoga is that the mind requires some object to hang upon. Just as we require a peg to hang our coat, we require some target to fix our mind, because what can the mind think of if it has no object? Now, what are the objects that are usually available to the mind's perception and cognitions? The objects are nothing but the things which the senses perceive and which are manifestations of Prakriti, isolated bits of matter scattered here and there, and it is difficult for the mind to take any one of them as the supreme ideal of concentration. The ideal chosen for purpose of practicing meditation should be such that it will draw our attention entirely and invoke our devotion and love. The love that is stirred up in our ideal is the power that will drive us towards that ideal, which is the object of love. We cannot take a pencil or a fountain pen and love it wholeheartedly as our dear brother or dear something, because we cannot see so much value in a pencil or a pen as to make it an object of our utter devotion and love. The argument will hold good not only in the case of pencil or a pen, but also in respect of all objects of this world. That's why the concept of Ishvara has been necessarily introduced by Patanjali as an ideal to be imagined and accepted for the purpose of concentration of mind in yoga. The ideal presented here is such that it is free from the Prakriti with all its diversions or diversities. We cannot concentrate on any human being. We cannot love a person wholly, because every person has a limitation. We begin to see defects. While we may be drawn towards any particular person or particular thing for the time being under certain circumstances for reasons of our own, this pull cannot continue for a long time. Why? Because it will be there only as long as emotions overwhelm. us for their particular purpose. But when this purpose is fulfilled, we will begin to see defects in the person or the object rather than the beauty that we saw earlier. Because the beauty and the value were seen only temporarily on account of the preponderance of a particular emotion. When that subsides on account of the satisfaction of its designs, then the usual sensory and mental activity begins to see the limitation of the finite in persons and things. The principle of God or Ishvara has been introduced into the system of yoga of Patanjali under the pressure of necessity or under the pressure of logical requirement. It is requirement, but it is only on such a protected individual as the Ishvara that the mind can easily concentrate itself as a source of its own satisfaction. Apart from this pragmatic necessity felt for the concept of God in yoga, there is a usual theological attitudes, which is that with which we are all familiar. God is not merely a hook on which we can all hang our coats. He is not merely an instrument that can work out our purpose, quite different from Ishvara himself. The theological concept of God or the highest religious concept is different from this pragmatic motion of yoga. The highest concept of God requires God to be recognized as the goal rather than as a means. While God is a fit object of concentration, He is also the goal of aspiration and the attainment, which point is not emphasized in the classical system of Patanjali, but can be combined adequately and suitably for our own practical purposes. It all depends upon what we mean by God. Every person, his or her own definition of it. One of the definition is a necessity of logic. If God were not there, we will have to invent him, said one philosopher, because we cannot get on without him. We will have to choose one God, just as we choose a prime minister or a president. The necessity is so pressing and so stringent that we cannot live in this world without such a supreme existence. The soul asking for God is a different matter altogether. It is asking for its own supreme ideal from which it cannot separate itself. In our daily practice, upasana or the worship of God may play a very important role. Karma, upasana, and jnana are generally accepted to be the stages of ascent of the aspiration of the student. Ishvara has done so much for us and continues to do so endlessly. And hence it is natural for us to thank him in same manner as we thank our mortal parents for their blessings. Only an unfortunate selfish person would not demonstrate his gratitude and lose opportunity to purify his or her heart. Please note that worship does not mean some mechanical recitations or blankness of mind. It is a proactive approach to imbibe wisdom through actions, knowledge, and contemplation. Now, what are the key components of worship? There are three major components. 1. Stuti, glorification. 2. Prardhana, prayer. 3. Upasana, yogic practice. We shall mainly focus on Stuti and Prarthana. We shall also cover Upasana in brief. However, this science would demand greater exposition. Let us explain Stuti in more detail. Stuti or glorification means stating the correct attributes of any entity in most truthful manner. Hence, false bettering of anything as well as unreasonable condemnation are both not stuti. The purpose of stuti of Ishvara is to understand the properties of Ishvara and attempt to model our own nature and actions in sync with him. For example, just as Ishvara is just and kind, we should also be just and kind. Ishvara never gives up, and hence we should also not give up. One who merely sings the virtues of Ishvara like a drama artist but does not put effort in changing his or her own character is simply wasting time. Because Ishvara is not narcissist dictator who enjoys being praised. Whatever stuti we do is solely for our own benefit by improving our own self. There are two types of stuti. Saguna stuti, glorification by remembering and understanding those attributes of Ishvara that are present in him. For example, he is eternal and pure. Nirguna stuti, glorification by remembering and understanding those attributes that are not present in Ishvara. For example, he has no form and he is never born. The difference is merely of semantics and not the fundamentalists. Now I have one more question. Can you present some mantras from Vedas having stuti of Ishvara? Ishvara is the main subject of Vedas. Hence, a large number of mantras having stuti of Ishvara are part of Vedas. For example, let us see in Yajurveda, he is present in everything, fastest and most powerful, pure, omniscient, knows everything, master of all, eternal, self-sufficient, and guides us all with knowledge of Vedas. This is called Saguna Bhakti. He is without body, never takes birth, has no nerves of gaps, does not conduct sin, is separate from pain and miseries. This is Nirguna Bhakti. Atharva Veda say, He is the greatest and we bow to Him. He has created and managed everything in all 10 directions in a marvelous integrated fashion so that we are benefited at most. He is the greatest and we bow to Him. Yajurveda says, He provides the power of knowledge to our souls. He provides us all true wisdom and bliss. All scholars worship Him and Him alone. Hence, we should worship Him and Him alone, who is the very definition of bliss and happiness. Prayers make sense only after due effort has been put. Hence, make the due payment and then request your lunch. He also creates a fire for our benefit. Shreya Kantaaya Kalyana Nidhe Dinam Shri Venkatanivasaaya Srinivasaaya Mangalam Mangalasasana Prairmadacharya Purogamaihi Sarvaesha Purvairacharya Satkritaya Stu Mangalam.